3 weeks ago, I interviewed the CEO of Pulsar Fusion, Richard Dinan, and I found the interview, like everything else at Pulsar Fusion, to be unique and quite interesting. And one thing that Pulsar has been focusing on when it comes to their technology is the impact that they could have not only on space travel, but also on the environment. As strange as that may sound, next-generation spaceflight propulsion could actually have a significant impact on the carbon footprint that we are putting into the atmosphere as rocket launches become more and more common and our presence in low Earth orbit and beyond becomes much larger scale. The number of times that we launch rockets into the atmosphere, burning dirty fuels in the process like RP-1 and various types of solid rocket propellants, well, we are going to have an increasing impact on the environment of this planet and the long-term consequences of a changing climate. And so Pulsar Fusion has been focusing a bit on that lately in some of the new data that they have put out for their Sunbird Fusion engine. But it isn't just the environment that they talk about, it's also the savings in terms of finances and, most importantly, the savings in time. A fusion engine has the potential to get us to distant destinations in the solar system in a fraction of the time that chemical engines can get us there. And also, it can do this without burning enormous amounts of conventional rocket fuel in the process. But instead of being satisfied with vague claims in CGI, Pulsar has decided to put all of these claims into hard numbers. And they shared all of this information with me yesterday, and I thought I would share it with the rest of you today. So strap in and get ready for a fusion-powered ride to Mars and other destinations in the solar system, courtesy of Pulsar Fusion. Good morning, spaceflight enthusiasts, and welcome to episode 1 of Spaceflight Week here on the Angry Astronaut. And the reason we have this, in case you're curious as to why we have these Alien Weeks and Spaceflight Weeks, is because we had a merchandise promotion, and whoever bought the most merchandise associated with the topic got a week dedicated to that topic. And the UFO aficionados, well, they definitely bought the most stuff, but the spaceflight folks and the home orbital equation shirt, that, by the way, that's my favorite one that Sunline came out with. Well, that came in second place, and so therefore we have a Spaceflight Week going on right now. And incidentally, if you missed your opportunity to get that home and orbital equation shirt, I think it might be coming back. It looks like Sunline were sufficiently pleased with the results of the promotion that we might be able to reopen the store. Probably not with all the same merchandise. Some of it's going to get discontinued, but at least some of it will be back, and perhaps even some new stuff as well. So stay tuned. Okay, enough talk about that. Let's talk about where I am and why I'm here and how that relates to Pulsar Fusion. I'm in Colorado right now in a little town called Cascade, Colorado, just outside of Colorado Springs. And tomorrow, Space Symposium is going to be taking place in Colorado Springs, the largest aerospace convention in the United States. And all of the big players are going to be there. Every big aerospace company you can think of, from SpaceX, McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and a lot of folks from other countries as well. All of them are going to be there, including Pulsar Fusion. And that's why these conferences are so valuable, because I get access to the latest information, the latest new technology, the latest progress that's been made by these companies, especially if they're coming out with cutting edge, bleeding edge technology like Pulsar Fusion. But the question still remains, I think, to a lot of you folks, how does all this work? I mean, we don't have fusion power yet. Fusion power is always 10 years, 20 years away, something like that, and we never seem to get any closer to perfecting a practical fusion reactor that can be used for anything useful anyway. So why do these folks think they're actually going to be able to make any of this work in the near future? Well, it's not important that you get a positive power reaction out of fusion in order to make a fusion propulsion system work. In other words, you don't have to get any energy out of it. The only thing you need to do is to create high energy plasma. And that's something that we've been doing in the laboratory for a very long time now associated with fusion. The big problem is the amount of energy that you need to pump into the reaction in order to create the plasma is more than the energy you get back out of the plasma. But that doesn't matter with fusion propulsion because you're not trying to create energy, you're trying to create plasma. And in the case of Pulsar Fusion, the way they're creating plasma is through helium-3 fusion, which creates very little in the way of neutron radiation, almost none, but instead, as a result of the reaction, you get high-energy protons, which are not radioactive, but at the same time, they have an enormous amount of energy behind them. And that high-energy plasma, ionized plasma, if directed by an electromagnetic field out the nozzle of a rocket, creates an enormous amount of thrust. We're talking hundreds of kilometers per second leaving the nozzle as opposed to only 4.4 kilometers per second with a traditional rocket engine. And so recently, Pulsar put all of this into numbers. They sent me an email actually letting me know that they had updated their website with a lot of new data as to what sort of practical applications their fusion engine might be put towards. And this, by the way, is called the Sunbird, for those of you who haven't seen my previous video on the topic. And let me tell you something, the Sunbird is so innovative. It is the best way, in my opinion, to make use of a nuclear engine in space, and the results in terms of getting to destinations within the solar system anyway are absolutely mind-blowing. So let's pay a quick visit to Pulsar's website and have a look at Sunbird again. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this technology, Sunbird is an independent spacecraft powered by a fusion engine, and also it can maneuver with smaller Hall effect thrusters, which, by the way, are also plasma thrusters, just with a lot less energy behind them. But the fusion engine in this spacecraft is designed to be docked with a rocket once that rocket reaches low Earth orbit. So to be clear, you use chemical engines to reach orbit, and then you dock this fusion engine onto your rocket, and it provides the thrust all the way to Mars, to the asteroid belt, to Saturn, wherever you want to go. So how does this save on carbon footprint in the atmosphere if you're still using chemical engines to reach orbit? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. First, let's talk about the radiation shielding on this thing, because that's a pretty important detail. So feel free to read along with me. Sunbird utilizes the latest in high-density blended metal composite shielding to maximize its useful lifespan. Space radiation, including cosmic rays, solar energetic particles or SEPs, and secondary radiation like neutrons, poses significant challenges for long-duration missions. Blended metal technologies aim to optimize shielding by combining metals with different atomic numbers and properties, integrating them with polymers or other lightweight materials to reduce mass while enhancing radiation attenuation. So the advantage here, Sunbird has the radiation shielding built into it, meaning that you don't have to put it on your rocket, protecting your astronauts from whatever radiation might be generated by this nuclear engine. Therefore, you save on weight, reducing the amount of chemical rocket fuel you need to use in order to get into orbit. But that's not the only savings we're talking about. Now, as I mentioned before, the Sunbird utilizes Hall effect thrusters in order to maneuver, much lower powered plasma thrusters that use electrical power to create the plasma instead of a fusion reaction. And these are the kinds of thrusters that Pulsar Fusion already builds for clients, mostly for use in satellites. Now, Hall effect thrusters offer high specific impulse, but not a lot of thrust because there isn't a lot of energy behind them. The electricity is coming usually from solar panels, but they do boost cost savings and data value for small spacecraft, again, like satellites, like this particular satellite called the JW200. These thrusters aid in attitude control, precision maneuvers, and orbital longevity, and Pulsar's Hall effect thrusters further enhance satellite orbital lifetimes through efficient drag compensation, diminishing launch needs, and adhering to industry standards via UK government facility testing. So they've been selling these Hall effect thrusters for a very long period of time, putting money in their coffers so they can work on their final objective, fusion propulsion. But let's move on from the Hall effect thrusters and look at the fusion drive itself. Sunbird carries 2 linear nuclear fusion engines on board, and these burn deuterium and helium-3, as I said before, to produce an aneutronic fusion reaction. What does that mean? It means that there are no neutrons created in the fusion reaction, meaning very little radiation. Very little radiation means less danger to the astronauts being pushed by this thing, but also a lot less danger and damage to the engine itself and to the rocket it's attached to. But how do you control and direct this plasma in the way that you want to? Well, once again, keep in mind that it's ionized. That being the case, it can be controlled by magnets. The plasma is confined and focused in what's called the diverter by using superconducting magnets to protect the nozzle components. And the exhaust speeds of this plasma of 223 kilometers per second are generated with an ISP of 10,000 to 15,000 seconds, as opposed to 450 seconds with conventional chemical engines. So an enormous difference, far bigger difference than any nuclear engines that are currently being worked on by NASA or pretty much by anybody else. So if this becomes a reality, if this sort of engine can actually be built and it produces the results that Pulsar is talking about, what are the practical results, the practical applications? Well, they have it right here on the website as well. Let's talk about going to Mars first. The current mission time to Mars is 7 to 8 months, maybe as little as 6, so between 210 and 240 days with a specific impulse of 450 seconds with an exhaust velocity of 4.4 kilometers per second with the best chemical engines. Sunbird, on the other hand, will cut the division time down to 120 days, and by the way, I think that's really conservative, and you're going to see why here in a little bit, with a specific impulse of 10 to 15,000 seconds and an exhaust velocity of 223 kilometers per second. But here's the big difference: an enormous amount of fuel saved. 2,798 tons worth of methane saved by using this mode of propulsion as opposed to chemical rockets. Why is that the case? Well, it's clear that Pulsar is a big fan of SpaceX Starship. Remember that Starship in low Earth orbit can't get any further unless it gets completely refueled. In order to refuel it enough to get all the way to Mars, it requires at least 10 launches of Starship. In order to carry out 10 launches of Starship, you're going to burn 2,798 tons worth of methane. But if you're not using the chemical engines at all to get to Mars, then no additional refueling launches are required. And also, the fewer launches you carry out through Earth's atmosphere, the smaller the chance of some sort of anomaly taking place on the way up. If you have only a single launch as opposed to 11 launches to get a Starship ready to go to Mars, that's going to make a big difference in terms of efficiency, in terms of carbon footprint, in terms of time saved, lots and lots of advantages to use a more advanced mode of propulsion than chemical engines to get to Mars. And the savings continue to increase if you travel to more remote destinations. So let's go ahead and move on from from Mars and go to Saturn instead. With chemical engines, 6.5 years, 2,373 days, as opposed to 365 days, 1 year with Sunbird because of the massive difference in specific impulse and exhaust velocity. Just to put this into perspective, you can burn a chemical engine for approximately 7.5 minutes. By way of comparison, Sunbird can keep burning its engine for over 2 hours and 40 minutes minimum, and you might be able to keep it burning longer than that. Just a colossal difference in ISP with similar propulsion equals massive improvements in travel time, and also a significant reduction in methane consumed. 3,662 tons worth of methane saved, probably because you're going to have to fill up Starship completely. The Mars estimate was based on a partial fill up, a smaller number of refuelings in order to get to Mars versus Saturn. And here's the CO2 savings. Methane, even though it clears the atmosphere quicker than CO2 does, it's still a greenhouse gas, and the CO2 emissions saved with the Saturn mission is 10,071 tons worth of CO2 saved. Now, we haven't had to deal with that sort of stuff up to this point because every mission to Saturn has involved a single expendable rocket pushing a lightweight probe out to Saturn. But if you're going to send bigger missions with 100 metric tons like Starship, it's going to require a ridiculous amount of rocket fuel or a fusion engine that utilizes a lot less fuel much more efficiently. But let's move on to the most interesting destination that Pulsar came up with, an asteroid called 16 Psyche. Now, the reason this asteroid is so interesting is because there is more mineral wealth tied up with this asteroid, which, by the way, is in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, than there is in the entire economy of all the nations on Earth combined. An insane amount of wealth tied up in this asteroid, a perfect place to mine, but it's so far away that it's going to take a ridiculous amount of time to get there, especially if we're talking about a round trip, 5 years with a conventional combustion rocket. But with Sunbird, we're talking 148 days, not one way, but round trip. Again, with 1,785 tons worth of methane saved, and also 4,909 tons worth of emissions saved. And finally, US dollar savings of $770 million saved per round trip. And what does that mean? It means far more economically viable asteroid mining. I mean, think about it for a moment. If asteroid miners can get their cargo back from 16 Psyche in 148 days instead of 1,825 days, think of how many more round trips they can carry out in the same amount of time and how much more incredibly valuable ore they can bring back to Earth or perhaps other colonies that we have established throughout the solar system in the future. People would be willing to pay whatever Sunbird costs on the front end if they could get these kinds of results in the long run. So we're looking at an impact to carbon footprint, an impact to the environment, reduced travel time across the solar system, incredibly reduced travel time, and a lot more efficiency. In my opinion, Pulsar has a winning product here. But what do you think? I'd like to see your opinions in the comments, but let's go ahead and wrap this up. So all this having been said, many people accuse me, or accuse Pulsar anyway, of being sort of a fraudulent organization, another organization that just uses a lot of fancy CGI, gets some grant money, but never actually creates anything. And I'm often questioned as to why I'm so critical of SpaceX, why I'm so critical of Elon Musk, not necessarily as critical of Pulsar Fusion, therefore accused of playing favorites. Perhaps I'm playing favorites because it's a British company or something like that, and I'm an Anglophile, etc., etc. Well, here's the reason I'm more critical of SpaceX, first of all. I became more critical of that company the moment they picked up the responsibility of putting human beings back on the moon. Elon put forward a proposal to NASA that was rock bottom price-wise, so he could beat everybody else out on price, and promised that Starship would be ready to put human beings on the moon by 2024. Which obviously hasn't happened, and Starship is nowhere close to being ready to put human beings on the moon. And let me tell you something, in a very short amount of time, that's going to become the main stumbling block to the Artemis 3 mission in returning human beings to the moon, because Starship's not going to be ready. Everything else will be. SLS, in spite of all of its drawbacks, and Orion, all of that is finished. It is a mature system, and it'll be ready to put human beings into cislunar space. It will be Starship that isn't ready, and that's what makes me so critical of Starship and makes me so demanding when it comes to progress, real tangible progress. But when it comes to Pulsar Fusion, for one thing, they're not making any sort of commitments that NASA is going to rely upon or anything. They're making estimates like anybody else would, but they do have tangible results. They have tangible experimental equipment that I've seen myself, including the biggest vacuum chambers in Europe that have recently been delivered to their facilities in Milton Keynes. So Pulsar Fusion, they are producing results. I mean, why would they have these massive vacuum chambers? They serve no useful purpose except to experiment with large-scale plasma engines or fusion engines. You can make smaller-scale stuff like Hall effect thrusters, which, by the way, they build hundreds of those. You can do that with a much smaller vacuum chamber. But these huge ones, their only practical application is to build engines like the one that they're promising to build. And when you have tangible equipment in your facility that you put right in front of my cameras, and also if you're willing to allow me to come into the facility to actually film your experiments in progress, to film the plasma as it's being created, as they have done, well, that gives them a lot of credibility also, and I can't wait to see what they're going to be doing next this year. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon or on PayPal, Cash App, etc. This is how I get out to Colorado. This is how I attend events like Space Symposium and get access to all this amazing information, all the details in the description. So until next time, stay angry about space.